Good afternoon to all of our parishioners here in Medford and in Jacksonville. I'm Father Ken Sampson with another COVID virus update. I just made one of those updates on Sunday, but it's already well outdated, even though we're just here on Wednesday in the afternoon on the 29th. And that's because usually on Tuesday we have all of our Zoom meetings with the Archdiocese, with various committees, with our region. And so some new guidelines and updates have come up or are expected to be received by us within the next week. So I just wanted to give you some new information. And there's another reason, I think, that is because, as I mentioned to some of our staff this morning, it's been interesting for me to observe when you look at the views of our various videos that about 400% increase in viewership is seen with our coronavirus videos versus our spiritual ones. I think that's because many of you are crossing your fingers hoping for some good news about the resuming of public mass or the resuming of our spiritual life as we knew it before all of this coronavirus stuff began. And I know that if I were in your shoes, I would be thinking the same thing. At any rate, I want to just let you know the developments of the past few days and to the best of my ability, give you some realistic expectations for the next few weeks. So first of all, you may or may not know this, but Governor Brown, the governor of Oregon, has formed a regular subcommittee where she meets with religious leaders of the state. And that includes Archbishop Sample, representing the Catholic Church, of course. She discusses with them the impact of church life of worship, and has asked for their input. So I think they have weekly gatherings. And based on the last meeting, he let us know on Tuesday morning that the governor will be releasing her plan of recovery on May 4th. So that will be early next week that she will release that. It's going to have contained within it some quantifiable scientific measurements of progress in order to advance through the phases of reopening. We don't know what those numbers are yet, though, so the assumption we're starting with when Archbishop talked with all the clergy is the number 25 or less, which is what it currently is now, frankly. The state law has it that 25 people or less can gather for public events. Archbishop Sample, for whatever reason, decided to take a more conservative number than that when it came to celebration of the Mass or other events. He determined that 10 people or less is a number he was more comfortable with, and therefore, when he made that decision, factoring in all of the information he was getting, that basically eliminated, logistically speaking, the possibility of us celebrating public mass in any meaningful way. I would add that on our vicariate level, which is Southern Oregon, for us, we had a meeting yesterday afternoon with all of our clergy. We feel like 25 people or less also logistically makes public mass impossible for us. So if that is the first number that we need to go on as a guideline, we're going to probably elect at least the larger parishes not to have public mass. You need to know, above all, of all the factors that the Archbishop talked about that he's concerned with, is that as we are now discussing restarting, he knows that he's going to give some general recommendations. Sometimes there'll be requirements, but more often they will be recommendations or best practices, and he knows that logistically speaking, different parishes will have to take different options. So for instance, if the governor set a quota of 50 people or less, the smallest rural parishes in Oregon could fully resume normal activity, because from Sunday Mass and weekday Mass, they would draw less than 50 people. For larger parishes, though, it would force us to have to create some kind of a sign-up system or a lottery system, and our clergy are unwilling to do that. The fact that it seems kind of demeaning but also unfair to determine who gets to go to Mass and who doesn't get to go to Mass. Probably the most disappointing detail of discussion that came to me was back when our quota was 250 people or less. Our church seats about 500 or just under 500. So our creative solution at that time was that we could seat 250 people in our church and then stream the Mass over in our parish hall, live stream it, and sort of treat that area, that building, as a separate event and fit another 250 people there. And we could do it simultaneously so that we could return to our full Mass schedule. When that very specific strategy was brought up, and a number of parishes have the facilities to be able to do this, Archbishop Sample's personal decision was that although that would meet the letter of the law of Oregon, he doesn't believe it meets the spirit of the law, and so he's not allowing that. He's specifically prohibited that as a solution. He's also prohibited the use of parking lot for having a drive-by or a parking lot type of Mass where people are separated by their cars, and I guess for the same reasoning. So this will be a slow process back, but when it does occur, some of the things that he's discussed, he brought up with us, he will be sending out shortly after the governor's decision. He will send out a list of guidelines that we have to figure out at each location how to resolve. Some of them he mentioned, though. For instance, with whatever restrictive number we have when Mass does begin again, the thought is that we mark seats in the pews where people are allowed to sit to ensure adequate spacing, 6 feet or greater. I think family units who live under the same roof will be allowed to sit together, but by household there has to be separation, and the seating will be marked so that after each Mass, after each service, we can disinfect those seating locations. That will be a change. Another change will be that we will not be taking up a collection at Mass, just for sanitary reasons. The recommended solution is that we set out a basket at some designated location, and we do ask that people contribute if they can, because we are definitely in need of that financial support, but it won't be taken up as part of the Mass, so that there's not the handling of the money and the passing of the basket. So that's the guideline we're asked to fulfill. We will also not be offering communion from the cup, and for a time we will suspend all lay Eucharistic ministers from their duties, because the recommended communion process will be single file, 6 feet apart, and with the priest distributing the Eucharist. You will be allowed to receive either on the tongue or in the hand, because that's the universal allowance of the church, and not even this health circumstance, in the Archbishop's opinion, can limit that option. But every effort at safety will be taken to make sure we're not making contact with people. So if a priest has to stop and re-sanitize their hands, they will do that. Probably it's not the law yet, but it might be recommended that people who do attend Mass wear a mask. I think among some of the other things, specific events, I know this will be a thing people are asking for. So we have a number of groups of people in flux who are waiting to hear about a scheduled date for a liturgical event. One of those groups would be our RCIA, who are waiting still patiently and eagerly to be initiated into the church. A second group are adults or high school students who've been preparing for confirmation. And a third group would be those children who are preparing for First Communion. Our hope initially was that we would be able to universally designate Pentecost as a suitable day to recreate some of the pomp and circumstance of those events, that we would try to focus on the Pentecost Vigil to receive our RCIA people into the church, and Pentecost Sunday to confirm folks. That has now been dismissed as probably not possible. Instead, what the Archdiocese is doing is, as each scheduled date of confirmation passes, and as the Easter time passes, the Archdiocese is generating letters of faculties to local pastors. That faculty would grant the priest to be in the place of the Archbishop for confirmation. And I'm told that the expiration date will be December 31st of this year. So it will run through this calendar year. And at this point, when we receive that letter, he's leaving that decision up to me and our faculty about when we will schedule those events. Depending on the numbers, people allowed, we may have to break it into groups. But there also arose the question, if we can't logistically have public mass, then we don't necessarily feel like we need to rush to initiate people into the church if they're not going to be able to continue to receive the Eucharist after that. So these are kind of complicated questions if the number allowed is quite small. So we will update you on that. Our scheduled confirmation date has not yet arrived. When it does, I'll receive that letter of faculties, but we will try to select a date that's significant on the liturgical calendar of the church, and the Archdiocese will produce a rites book just unique for this year that we can use for that celebration, because there are certain elements that we won't be able to include that would be at the Easter Vigil. Similarly, this will be true also of First Communion and confirmation. First Communion may take place into the summertime. We don't know yet. We don't even know, still on the school scale, if school will be allowed to open in the fall on its normally scheduled time. I know that other states have already started reopening. My own home state of Montana reopened on Monday of this week, and so they're resuming cautiously regular life with limiting numbers and wearing masks and having social distancing. Other states will soon follow. I think Texas is opening on Friday. I think Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, some other states have already opened. Oregon will be on the last wave of it, it looks like, from what the governor's talking about. So we'll just have to exercise patience. I know that I've gotten a call from, thankfully it's a low number, but a few of you quite upset, thinking that as a church we're lacking courage, or we're lacking backbone, or whatever, that we should just openly break this law or challenge it. I guess we need to understand the obedience of faith. We need to understand we have a head shepherd. And as he said on Tuesday, and I appreciate this, he said, some of you think I'm being too cautious. Some of you thinking I'm being too reckless. A number of you have voiced opinions that you don't agree with my approach. And I would just say I appreciate that. I realize people are coming from different viewpoints on that, but I would ask that we stand together nevertheless. And that's what we're trying to do. So our Archbishop, I think, is showing extraordinary leadership in this time of uncertainty, and we ask continued patience as we put it all together. But just be on the watch for those opportunities when we can reschedule Mass. So I think that's all I have as updates. I'll let you know when more things come to the forefront. In the meantime, stay strong, stay healthy, and may God bless you, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.